there. I had left by that time, I have to say. I was lucky, although I did know that they were approaching. And we were doing on a Friday morning, we were doing a session with some of the local journalists, some of whom I've stayed in touch with and befriended, or they befriended me over the years. But they said, Keith, I think that we'd better sort of get you on the way south back to Abuja, because there's a fairly heavy band of people waving guns and so on and so forth. They burned several churches because there were Christian churches there that were operating, even though it was a heavily Muslim country. We'd better get you out of town and on the way south, because if they get here, you're probably the only white person in 2,000 or 3,000 square miles, and they may not be terribly sympathetic to that. So off I went on that Friday afternoon, and we went down to a town called Josh, Jos, Josh. And on the way up, I'd been told that we were going to stop at Josh overnight, which indeed we did. But we started to come into a town. I got it in my mind that this was a small little place, because they said it's up on the plateau, very pleasant, and in fact the heart of Josh is very pleasant. But we started to come into an area where there were rusty cars and just ramshackle buildings and homes and kids playing in the street and so on and so forth. And eventually I said, where's this? And they said, Josh. And I said, my goodness me, I thought we were going to a little town. And Josh is a city of some 6 million. It's incredible. We drove and drove and drove through the suburbs before getting to the heart of Josh, which is not terribly big, but is actually quite delightful. The only thing is that when you get there, you have to argue that you made reservations. Luckily, I had a very heavy-handed partner, Kingsley Uranta, whose birthday it was. He turned a little over 50, I think, the other day, Kingsley. So if you're listening, Kingsley, which you're not, but when you might get around to it, is another happy birthday, and many, many happy returns may we have in the future, even though I'm getting on a bit, to happy days in Nigeria, which we shared together. But anyway, Kingsley sorted them out. And we were able to stay. The rooms that we booked were eventually admitted that they were for us. And on the way back, because we were unexpected and a little early, they argued vehemently that we hadn't made a reservation. And we checked with Abuja, the office in Abuja. Yes, that had been made. We quoted numbers and so on, but they were adamant. But they did find us a place which is broadly a private house, not very far away. And we actually had a superb breakfast. It was a very nice place. I mean, I had, to all intents and purposes, a huge room all to myself, and television and so on and so forth. So on that occasion, I was well looked after, because the hotel refused to accept that I'd got any sort of reservation. And I've stayed in that hotel 3 or 4 times, and I much preferred the private house. But there we are. So those are some of the adventures in Nigeria. I've got another. No! Here's one. I have no idea whatsoever what this one is all about. I chose it because it's called King Street, and it is written by the 126ers. And the reason that I chose it was that there is a King Street just off Covent Garden, and I was had an office there for perhaps a year or a little more, and enjoyed being surrounded by the events that take place in Covent Garden in England, because in the summer you have lots of street actors and so on, large crowds. The old market, which I think was a fruit and veg market, has been turned into little boutiques and little stalls and little shops. But the structure is still there, and it's not very far at all from the centre. It's not very far from Trafalgar Square, Leicester Square, and so on. So I saw King Street, and I thought, well, let's have a go at that. But I'm going to put you through it with me, because I only could listen to a couple of bars before I came on the air, and we've been on for 20 minutes now. So let's go to King Street and hear what they have to say for themselves. There we go. that is written by the 126ers and performed by the 126ers. I'm going to try and give you the artists as we go along, because it is important, I think, that we give them as much publicity as possible, because some of this stuff is really, really very nice, and you probably won't hear it in many places other than on my radio show. So stick them in your mind. King Street by the 126ers. And the reason that I haven't been giving out the names of the artists is that sometimes it's difficult to determine who it is when you're actually downloading these things. But I'm going to make a note every morning now so that you know who puts up these rather nice, very pleasant songs. And let's go to the lingo tracks. Well, the politicians aren't. See, I'm keep on hitting the red there. Let's try to tone it down a wee bit so I don't blast you out of your bed or your sitting room or from breakfast, wherever you are this morning. It's 8:32 in Lewes in East Sussex, the county town of East Sussex, and a very historic town. The name Lewes comes from the Anglo-Saxon lose, L-O-O-S, which means a hill or a tor, and indeed Lewes is very hilly. So that's where the name comes from, and it just indicates just how long there's been a settlement here, and so many important historic key moments have taken place in Lewes you could shake a stick at. And in fact, there is a documentary which you can see on the Together channel, and sometimes you can see it on one or two other channels who have managed to nick it. And you can see it on Mirador Television because we serialise it, and it's called The Bloody Past of a Tiny Town. And initially the people are together, very nice people they are, but they said, we don't think that this will be, we'll do it almost as a favour, because we don't think it'll be of interest to anybody other than those people who live in East Sussex. And it swept the country. It does extremely well, and they've booked it for another 3 years, so that everybody can get a chance to watch it. And it's, as they say, gathering legs. So if you want to have a look at what a tiny town is all about, Lewes, and its bloody history, you can find it from time to time on the Together channel, which is on the Sky platform, while it's on Freeview and so on and so forth. So take a look and see whether, in fact, it turns you on. One thing I do throughout the post is I always end an episode by diving into a pub. And at one time, Lewes had 63 pubs and 17 breweries. Now it's only got 16 pubs and 1 brewery, but nonetheless, in an 8-part series, there was plenty of opportunity to dive in and out of a different pub. And why not? Just back, one of the things about Lewes is that on November the 5th, for a variety of reasons, the biggest celebration of Guy Fawkes' bonfire takes place every November the 5th. It's huge. Lewes is a town of about 17 to 18,000, and if it's November the 5th falls on a Saturday night and the weather is good, it has been known to swell to as many as 100,000, and that is some influx of people. Much as the authorities try, but for safety reasons, to keep people away, it's not happening. It's such a spectacular event. But the reason that I mention that is that there is one bonfire society, and they are the town is grouped into various societies depending on where you live, and they prepare the bonfire and the costumes and the fireworks and so on and so forth. It's a very, very big deal. All the way around it's a big deal. But one group black up as Zulus, and they came under heavy criticism because somebody objected. This was racism of the worst order, and we shouldn't do these sort of things and so on. And the pressure was so great that they didn't, at least for 1 year. Now, I related this story to a Nigerian friend, and he burst out laughing, and he said, for goodness sake, what on earth are they thinking about? Is the question of that sort of race isn't prevalent in Nigerian society. They don't care. They don't care what we think about black people. They get on with a very civilized way of life. They've got their problems the same as we have. The thing is that their politicians are no different to our politicians. They'll play up anything. So let's not speak for their politicians, but the average man in the street doesn't give a fig about colour. And one of the great joys that I had in Nigeria was driving to Damaturu, which is about it's a 2-day drive. It's a long way, and the roads aren't exactly the highway that you can expect coming out of San Francisco. And we would stop to pick up milk and bananas at a small wayside filling station or little cafe dash store. So we would order milk and we would order bananas, and suddenly a whole bunch of children, about anywhere from 4 to 10, I would say, they swamp around because what they're looking for is a handout. But then the word went out, there's a white man in the car. And in these parts of even Nigeria, which is incidentally about 180 million people, Nigeria, and it's a vast landscape. So don't think you're talking about a small African country. It is huge. And so the word would go out, and suddenly all sorts of people were around, and all they wanted to do was to glimpse at a white man, because they didn't see him very often, if at all. And on one occasion, one little boy, and they are just beautiful kids. I mean, black. Hang on a minute. Black faces with extraordinarily white teeth, and they're beaming from ear to ear. And one little boy put his hand in through the window, and he said, well, he didn't say, he just beamed at me and rubbed his finger along my hand. He wanted to see whether the white would rub off. Now, you tried talking to them about the silly nonsense of this. There's nothing wrong, nothing silly about discrimination, but the way that it's taken to extremes sometimes is just so silly, because a lot of people whom we say, these groups say that they're protecting and so on and so forth, they don't care. They don't find that at all an issue. It's not inhuman. It is not an issue that they can get excited about. Thank you. You whites go off, you stupid people, and you fight about it. And that's nothing to do with the black community.